War has always been presented to the public as a matter of national security, patriotism, or unavoidable defense. Yet when we look closely at who actually gains and who actually loses, a very different picture appears. The primary beneficiaries of large scale conflicts are rarely the ordinary citizens whose taxes fund military operations or whose families supply soldiers. Instead, war concentrates wealth and power in the hands of a small group of political elites, corporate executives, and financial institutions that operate far from the front lines. While working people face rising prices, job instability, and cuts to public services, these powerful groups often experience record profits and expanded influence. Defense contractors are a central example of this imbalance. When conflict escalates, government contracts for weapons, vehicles, surveillance systems, and logistics multiply. These contracts are worth billions, creating enormous financial incentives to sustain or intensify military engagement. Shareholders benefit, executives receive bonuses, and corporations expand their market reach, while taxpayers shoulder the cost. At the same time, communities struggle with underfunded schools, overcrowded hospitals, and deteriorating infrastructure because public money is redirected toward military spending rather than social development. Political leaders also gain from war in less visible ways. Crises allow governments to consolidate authority, pass emergency measures, and reduce public scrutiny under the justification of national security. In such environments, dissent is often discouraged and complex economic problems are reframed as external threats. This creates a powerful distraction from domestic inequality, unemployment, and social unrest, shifting public attention away from accountability and toward fear driven unity. Meanwhile, ordinary people experience the consequences directly and indirectly. Families of soldiers live with uncertainty and emotional strain. Workers face inflation caused by disrupted trade routes and rising energy costs. Young people see fewer opportunities as education budgets are cut and job markets become unstable. In conflict zones, civilians endure displacement, shortages of basic necessities, and the collapse of local economies. These costs are long lasting and extend far beyond the official end of any war. The gap between elite benefit and public suffering reveals a deeper structural problem. Economic systems that reward militarization create a cycle in which conflict becomes normalized and even economically desirable for those at the top. When profit is tied to destruction, peace becomes less attractive to those who control resources and political influence. This imbalance turns war into a business model rather than a last resort, reinforcing inequality on a global scale. Understanding this reality is not about denying security concerns, but about questioning whose security is prioritized and whose sacrifices are considered acceptable. True security for ordinary people means stable jobs, affordable health care, access to education, and safe communities. When these needs are ignored in favor of endless military expansion, it becomes clear that the CIST military spending is often justified as a necessary investment in national defense, yet its hidden cost is the slow erosion of public services that directly support everyday life. When governments allocate massive portions of their budgets to weapon systems, troop deployments, and overseas operations, that money does not appear out of thin air. It is taken from the same pool of public resources that could otherwise be used to strengthen healthcare systems, improve schools, repair infrastructure, and expand social safety programs. This trade off is rarely presented honestly to the public, even though its effects are felt in nearly every community. Healthcare is one of the most visible victims of this imbalance. Underfunded hospitals struggle with staff shortages, outdated equipment, and limited access to essential treatments. Preventive care programs are reduced or delayed, which ultimately increases long term healthcare costs and worsens public health outcomes. While billions are spent on advanced military technology, many citizens face long waiting times, high medical bills, and inadequate mental health services. This contradiction highlights a troubling set of priorities in which preparation for war is valued more than the well being of the population. Education suffers in similar ways. Schools and universities often operate under tight budgets, leading to overcrowded classrooms, underpaid teachers, and reduced academic programs. Students lose access to art, science, and vocational training that could prepare them for meaningful careers. At the same time, military research and defense projects receive generous funding, reinforcing a system where intellectual and technological resources are directed toward conflict rather than innovation that improves daily life. Infrastructure is another area deeply affected by excessive military spending. Roads, bridges, public transportation systems, and water networks require constant investment to remain safe and functional. When these projects are delayed due to budget constraints, communities face higher maintenance costs, increased accidents, and reduced economic efficiency. The long term consequences include slower economic growth and lower quality of life, particularly in working class and rural areas that already struggle with limited public investment. Social welfare programs also experience pressure as military budgets expand. Support for low income families, housing assistance, unemployment benefits, and food security initiatives are often among the first areas to face cuts. This increases economic insecurity and deepens inequality, forcing vulnerable populations to absorb the impact of policy choices they did not make. The result is a society where resources are concentrated on military strength while social stability weakens. The broader economic effect is a cycle of dependency on militarized spending. Instead of building sustainable growth through education, healthcare, and green technology, governments rely on defense industries to stimulate employment and production. This approach locks economies into patterns that prioritize conflict related industries over long term social development and public prosperity. At the center of many modern conflicts lies a powerful and often overlooked force, the profit motive. When economic systems reward companies for producing weapons, surveillance technology, and military equipment, rising global tensions become financially advantageous. Defense corporations do not merely respond to wars after they begin, they actively prepare for and benefit from the anticipation of conflict. Stock prices rise with instability, contracts multiply during crises, and long term agreements ensure continued production even when diplomatic solutions are available. This creates a structural incentive where peace becomes less profitable than prolonged confrontation. Lobbying plays a crucial role in sustaining this dynamic. Large defense firms invest significant resources in influencing policymakers, shaping legislation, and promoting higher military budgets. Through campaign donations, political consulting, and strategic partnerships, these corporations gain access to decision makers who determine national security priorities. As a result, policies that favor increased defense spending are often framed as essential for safety, even when independent analyses suggest alternative approaches could achieve security at a lower social cost. Media narratives also contribute to this profit driven cycle. Sensational coverage of international tensions can amplify public fear and uncertainty, creating an environment where calls for increased military readiness appear reasonable or even necessary. When threat perceptions rise, public resistance to defense spending weakens, allowing governments to pass large military budgets with minimal debate. This atmosphere benefits corporations that rely on continuous production and sales, reinforcing the link between public anxiety and private profit. Another consequence of this system is the normalization of permanent militarization. Instead of treating war as an extraordinary event, governments begin to operate in a constant state of preparedness, with standing contracts, ongoing research projects, and continuous arms development. This permanence reduces the urgency to pursue diplomatic solutions and conflict prevention strategies, since economic structures are already built around sustained military activity. Over time, the idea of reducing defense spending becomes politically difficult as entire regions and workforces become dependent on military related industries. The global impact of this profit driven approach extends beyond national borders. Arms exports increase the likelihood of regional conflicts as weapons sold to allied governments often end up intensifying local power struggles. This creates new markets for defense companies while worsening instability in already vulnerable regions. The cycle repeats as new conflicts generate new demand for weapons, surveillance systems, and security services. This economic logic transforms war from a tragic failure of diplomacy into a predictable outcome of market incentives. When corporations thrive on instability and governments rely on militarized industries for economic growth, the boundaries between security policy and business strategy become blurred. The result is a system where human lives, social stability, and international cooperation are subordinated to financial returns and corporate expansion. One of the most troubling aspects of modern conflict is how easily the human cost becomes invisible behind statistics, political language, and strategic calculations. Leaders often speak in terms of operations, objectives, and collateral outcomes, language that removes the emotional and personal reality from what is actually happening on the ground. Behind every number is a family disrupted, a community destabilized, and a future altered. When power politics dominate the conversation, these human stories are pushed aside, treated as unfortunate side effects rather than central concerns. Civilians living in regions affected by conflict experience daily uncertainty that goes far beyond the battlefield. Access to clean water, food, electricity, and healthcare becomes unreliable. Schools close or operate irregularly, interrupting education and limiting opportunities for young people. Local economies collapse as businesses shut down and supply chains break apart. These disruptions do not disappear when fighting slows. They leave long term scars that can take generations to heal. Young people face particularly severe consequences. Many grow up in environments shaped by fear and instability, which affects mental health, learning outcomes, and future prospects. Instead of focusing on creativity, innovation, and personal growth, they are forced to adapt to survival oriented realities. In some cases, youth are pressured into roles shaped by conflict rather than education or professional development, narrowing the range of possibilities available to them and reinforcing cycles of poverty and social fragmentation. Families also carry heavy emotional and psychological burdens. Parents struggle to provide stability while facing economic uncertainty and safety concerns. Extended families are often separated by displacement, migration, or disrupted transportation systems. The emotional stress of constant uncertainty can lead to long term mental health challenges, including anxiety and trauma, which rarely receive adequate attention or resources in post conflict recovery efforts. Even in countries not directly experiencing combat, ordinary citizens are affected in quieter but significant ways. Rising energy prices, increased living costs, and reduced public spending create economic pressure on households. Communities experience growing social tension as resources become more limited and political divisions deepen. While leaders debate international strategies, everyday people absorb the consequences through higher bills, reduced services, and declining economic security. This disconnect between political decision making and human impact reflects a deeper problem in how power is exercised. When leaders prioritize influence, dominance, and geopolitical positioning, they often distance themselves from the lived realities of those affected by their choices. The result is a system where abstract goals outweigh human dignity, where strategic advantage overshadows compassion, and where suffering becomes normalized as an acceptable cost of maintaining global influence. True security is often misunderstood as the accumulation of military power, advanced weapons, and global dominance. Yet history repeatedly shows that lasting stability comes from cooperation, dialogue, and strong social foundations. Diplomacy offers a path that addresses the root causes of conflict rather than simply managing its symptoms. When nations invest in communication channels, regional partnerships, and international institutions, they create frameworks for resolving disputes without resorting to violence. These efforts reduce mistrust, prevent misunderstandings from escalating, and open space for negotiated solutions that protect lives and resources. Economic cooperation is another critical pillar of real security. Trade agreements, shared infrastructure projects, and development partnerships build mutual dependence that discourages conflict. When countries benefit from peaceful exchange, the cost of war becomes economically irrational. This interdependence does not eliminate disagreement, but it shifts incentives away from confrontation and toward compromise. Shared prosperity becomes a stabilizing force that encourages long term planning instead of short term power struggles. Social investment within nations is equally important. A society with strong healthcare systems, quality education, affordable housing, and reliable public services is more resilient to internal and external pressures. People who feel secure in their basic needs are less vulnerable to fear based political messaging and less likely to support aggressive policies driven by panic or misinformation. Social stability strengthens democratic participation and builds public trust, which are essential for responsible decision making at the national level. Education plays a particularly powerful role in shaping peaceful futures. Teaching critical thinking, cultural understanding, and conflict resolution skills equips younger generations to engage with global challenges in constructive ways. Exposure to diverse perspectives reduces stereotypes and promotes empathy, making it harder for simplistic narratives of enemies and threats to dominate public discourse. When education systems emphasize cooperation and global responsibility, they prepare citizens to support policies that prioritize diplomacy over domination. Investment in sustainable development also contributes to long-term security. Addressing issues such as climate change, food security, and energy access reduces competition over scarce resources, which is a common driver of conflict. Renewable energy projects, environmental protection initiatives, and sustainable agriculture programs create jobs while stabilizing ecosystems and communities. These efforts lower the likelihood of displacement and economic collapse, two factors that often fuel political instability. Shifting priorities from militarization to human development requires political courage and public engagement. It demands questioning long standing assumptions about power and redefining what strength truly means. Strength can be measured in the health of a population, the accessibility of education, the fairness of economic systems, and the ability of societies to resolve disagreements without violence. When nations choose to invest in people rather than weapons, they lay the groundwork for a future shaped by cooperation, resilience, and shared responsibility rather than fear and perpetual conflict.